The First World War ended 102 years ago. There's no one left to remember the battles, the life, the mud, or the deaths. Just 20 years later, the world is once again arming and firing and dying. The Second World War ended 75 years ago. For most, more than their lifetime ago. Some still live who remember something of the last World War, but they are fewer and far between. The day will soon be here when nobody is alive who remembers. The one member of our congregation who remembered it clearly died last week. Matthew Gazenbeck, who told stories of growing up amid the deprivations and dangers of occupied Holland, where his granny hid a Jewish family, and of his choice to live in Canada, because of how our soldiers were so respectful and generous, differing from their American counterparts. He wrote a book to share his memories of life here and there, and as a result, we can still learn lessons from his life and the realities of wartime, even though Matthew is no longer here to tell his tales. As we do our remembering today of the sacrifices of the armed forces who served during past wars to protect the values we hold dear, we also need to remember the civilians. They worked in the factories that provided the arms. They worked on the farms and dug up their front lawns to provide food. There were the women who, for the first time, stepped into jobs traditionally done by men, and the children who didn't see their fathers for years on end, or ever. The people who remember those times will not be with us much longer. Soon those war years will no longer be a living memory for anyone. Today, there are projects aimed at collecting the stories of those who yet live, at Sunnybrook and across the country, fading memories being recorded. Wartime letters discovered in attics, dusty and forgotten, are archived lovingly for the insights they give. The cost of things, the scarcity, the ration books needed to buy meat or eggs, who could get gas and drive a car, and the special rations that mothers of newborns were given to get milk. The things of everyday life, the artifacts and the memories, fading and enshrined. And why do we care? Why do we cherish the letters from a 20-year-old, far from home trying to be a hero in his mother's eyes? Or the carving created by a prisoner of war? Or the pressed poppy from a far-off field? Why do we gather and march and salute, and the bugles sound and the lament heard, and names long forgotten read, and pages of the Book of Remembrance turned? Remembrance Day, honoring what we do not remember. And just as the First World War did not turn out to be the war to end all wars, neither did the Second. Wars still rage, and men and women, military and civilian, still suffer and die. So what are we doing with Remembrance Day? What is it that we are noting and celebrating and remembering? And why should our children and grandchildren continue to remember what they can have no memory of? It's over 2,000 years since the Prince of Peace was born, and 800 years before that the prophet Isaiah promised a world in which people would beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. Since time immemorial, generation after generation has borne witness to the misery of war, and the dream of peace remains just that, a dream. Soldiers still die in distant fields. We have progressed to the point that our wars for the past 75 years have been kept more or less local, and nuclear bombs have remained in their silos, the big gun that would end it all. It's not that we've learned to live together in harmony and respect. Families continue to flee the killing fields and end up in refugee camps or seeking a new land through the leaky boats of smugglers who take all they have and frequently their lives as well. By the end of 2019, nearly 80 million people were uprooted and fleeing wars or persecutions, according to the United Nations. In other words, 1% of the world's population lacks a place they can call home. Male, female, the elderly and infants, knowing no land to call home, to call their own. Lives twisted with hatred as they tell and retell the stories of the enemies who chased them thither. War comes in many forms. Lone figures stab and shoot in the name of their God. Tribe attacks tribe. Languages and faith divide. Greed for what others have provides excuses. Boundary lines exacerbate ancient differences. And the dream of peace is lost once more. In our own city, on our own streets, there are wars. Not with those wearing military uniforms, acting in the name of the state, but clad in the hoodies and tattoos of the street gangs. Young men and women who have not learned how to live in peace and who have no wish to claim it. They live and die in the name of their general, their drug lord, the gangster, the hood. And they live and die defending the turf on which they grew or claim now as theirs. And we need to remember them in our prayers, and we need to make sure that we support those who are forced to live with them. We need to be brave soldiers of the streets of our city who cede no turf to this invading army of pain and suffering for so many. So often when asked why they do not act, do not inform, do not confront, people answer, it's none of my business. Well, that's what I'm sure many said as war clouds appeared on the horizons of Europe or the Middle East, or as nations were lost to criminals. And it is just not true. The health of our city, of our nation, is our business. It's why we have elections. It's why we are able to speak out and defend free speech. It's why we can worship as we wish, marry who we want, and live where we will. Just as we observe the dictums of the medical and political leaders and distance ourselves these days and wear masks to protect the public health of all, we need to act and speak out against violence and drugs and slavery and abuse on the streets of our city. For if the army of Jesus, those of us who have given our hearts to him, do not care enough to defend what is good and true, there is no point in remembering anything, for war in all its horror will surely return. We need to respect those who do their best to make the world a better place, a peaceful place, a place where law and order and good government can solve differences between peoples without resort to violence. It is the dream we must cling to, the world we must strive for, the world our Prince of Peace wishes us to have. And we need to be grateful for those of previous wars who sacrificed their youth, and far too often their lives. They fought for a better world, a world in which one need not fear their government or their neighbor. Each of us needs to fight for the same thing in our own way, in our own homes and workplaces, our streets and parks, and wherever we may be. We need to stand up for what is right and kind and just. Not because the law tells us we must, but because those who went before us fought so that we would have the freedom to choose peace and to stand up for it in all that we do. So let that be what we remember this Remembrance Day. That their gift to our generation was our right to choose peace and fight to end the differences between peoples with words, that the swords may ever be sheathed. So may it be. Amen. Now, turn out on the 11th to watch an online service. Stand for the moments of silence and remember, it is the least that we can do. And today is Sunday, so say a prayer and participate in a service, and may God bless you one and all. Until next time, be well.